Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Python Pulse, the very first episode. It is Friday, January 13th, Friday the 13th, a very lucky Friday the 13th. And I am very lucky to be able to spend this episode talking about dev containers, code spaces, and Postgres and all of the above with the brilliant Pamela Fox. We're going to start the episode by going through a few announcements, and then I'll introduce our guest. She'll be able to do her own introduction far better than I can, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of today. So great to have everyone here. So top of the stream, we're celebrating 10 years of Azure App Service free tier. So for all of our students, entrepreneurs, hobbyists looking for free Azure development, check out the options that are available to get your app in the cloud. We also have the awesome VS Code editor, and known for its extension in the marketplace, is now facilitating Pythonistas to build our own. The Python extension template helps you get started building your own VS Code extension for your favorite Python tool. So we love seeing Python extension activity, and we have many plans on highlighting some of our contributors in the future. So make sure you get some of those extensions created, and I'd love to spotlight some of the really awesome work our community does. We also have the Azure App Service team that now supports Python 3.11. That's huge. The Python 3.11 just came out in October. It is the extra fast version that Microsoft had a big hand in helping make the version it is today. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Microsoft's part in Python 3.11, you can go to devblogs.microsoft.com/Python. And we have we're getting more, and we have tons of articles there. And there'll definitely be a place for more articles. And we have a great article about faster C Python at Microsoft. Also, we have Azure Functions now supporting Python 3.10 preview. And then we also have more AZD templates. AZD is a command line interface for Azure Solutions and provides a clear path for writing Python code and other code for the cloud. So we have templates provided by the community, and now we have more. And we welcome more community contributions. So really excited to be able to show those things. And if you want more information on the links that we talk about throughout this stream today and any of these announcements, please go to our show notes. The link is at the bottom of this slide. Yeah, awesome. So now we can talk to you, Pamela. Hi, Pamela.
Hello. Very excited to be here.
So excited to have you.
All right. So yeah, I am Pamela. I'm one of the cloud advocates in Python at Microsoft. That means my job is to figure out how we can use Python to run apps in the Azure cloud. So I spend a lot of my time on Azure App Service, Azure Container Apps, Azure Functions, and doing all of that with Python. So usually with Flask or Django or Fast API, something like that. I also get to use VS Code a lot, which is great because it's my favorite editor, and it was my favorite editor before I came to Microsoft too. It's just a really good editor, and I've seen a lot of editors in my day. So it's a really fun job. Before I was at Microsoft, I taught Python at UC Berkeley for a few years. I see there's a few people in the chat who are studying Python right now, so I know what it's like the Python student experience. So let's get started.
Go.
All right, so we're gonna be talking about dev containers with Python. So I'm gonna build up to our grand finale of Postgres and dev containers, but I want to start off with just figuring out what a dev container is, because I think a lot of people haven't used it. In the chat, maybe you could share what your experience has been like with dev containers if you have actually used it. So let's start. So a dev container is a way of creating a development environment using a Docker container and then some additional configuration file in order to describe that development environment. So it's a nice way of making a reproducible developer environment. And if you're from Python, you might think like, oh, is that like VM, right? Where VM, you make a new VM when you're working on a Python project, and that's where you install in your packages. And it is similar to a VM because you're isolating your environment, right? So it's like, this is my dev container for this project, and this is my dev container for the other project.
Right.
But a dev container can do a lot more than a VM, because a dev container can it's across many languages, so it can install any sorts of tool that you need in your environment, and it can also customize the Viz Code experience, as we'll see.
Very cool.
So let's start off with a basic dev container. So let's look through all my projects here. So I'm going to start off with this Python 3.11 playground. So let's say, on my machine, I default to Python 3.10, and I want to have a development environment for Python 3.11. So what I could do is actually make a dev container for that. So I'm going to open this up, and it actually prompts me to reopen this in the container. So I click that. So what just happened very quickly is that because I have this Viz Code dev containers extension installed, let me find it, dev containers. Okay, so this is the extension I have installed. So because I have this extension, whenever I open a project, it looks for this .dev container folder.
Right.
And if it sees it, it says, oh, it looks like we could open this in the dev container. Would you like to do that? So that was that little button that I clicked at the bottom real quick. So it's open now. And what I can do, and now how do I know it's open in dev container? I look at the bottom left. If you can see down here, I'll bring it up. You see it says dev container :
I see it.
There we go. All right, sweet. So if you see that, that means you are in a dev container.
Cool.
So that means since this is 3.11, I should be able to say Python -- version, and then C3.11. Start up a little Python interpreter. Here we are, 3.11. So we get all the 3.11 benefits. Woo. How did I do this? Okay. So inside dev container, let's delete this thing. Boop, boop, boop. There's two files, Docker file and dev container.json. So we'll start with Docker file. So a Docker file describes how to make a Docker container, and it can have a lot of things on it. So, what you can do, like Docker containers, you kind of layer them. So you can pull from an existing image, and then you could pull additional things here. In this case, all I'm doing is actually, I just have one line. So all I'm doing here is reusing an existing image, and I haven't actually done anything on top of it. In the future ones I show you, we will do more things on top, but this is like the simplest Docker file we can have. Great question from Christopher. As a teacher, I don't believe in stupid questions. I think all questions are really good questions. And a lot of times a question means I didn't say something. So yeah, in order to do this in Viz Code locally, I need Docker Desktop. So let's find that little whale. So it says Docker Desktop is running. Let's open the dashboard. And these are the running containers. You see there's only one running right now. And you can actually see the image name is Python 3.11 Playground. That's the name of my project. So yeah, every time you start up in your local Viz Code, if you open something in a dev container, that is literally using Docker Desktop to run a container, and you can check that on your desktop. That does mean it's going to use more battery. The other day I had 6 dev containers running at once, and I ran out of battery in like an hour. Because Docker, if you've worked with Docker before, it likes to just consume.
Yes.
It's just a hungry hippo, or a hungry whale.
Yeah.
CPU. So here we go. Yeah, so you will need Docker Desktop as a prerequisite for using this locally. You don't need it for GitHub Codespaces. In terms of performance, so I was just talking about like Docker does like to use up lots of memory and CPU, but in terms of the actual performance, it's very fast to work with once it loads. So it can take between this was a really fast one to load because it was already cached, because I'd already run this yesterday. But if I hadn't run this in a while, it might have taken like 5 minutes even to load. So if you haven't ever started up a particular dev container for a project, or if it's been a long time and it's no longer in the cache, then it can take up to like 5 minutes to actually build that dev container. So that part is slow, right? Because it actually does have to build that image in order to run the container. But once it's loaded, then everything is very fast. I find VS Code to be the fastest IDE. I don't have any performance issues with VS Code. So once it actually has that image built and the container loaded, it will be fast. And then subsequent times that you open the dev container, it'll be fast because that image will be cached on your machine. So it's just that first time where it needs to build up the Docker image that it can take some time.
Cool.
Great questions. Loving it. All right. So here we have our very simple Docker file. So this is pulling from an existing dev container image, and they're described in a GitHub repo from Microsoft. And so this is a dev container image that already is just built for 3.11 and has some other just standard tools that you would want as a Python developer for 3.11. So if you want to see the content, you can follow that link there. So that's a great image to use for a Python environment. Then we have dev-container.json, and this is really customizing the editor experience. So in this case, the VS Code experience. So first we have the name of this dev container. I think I'll rename it to Python 3.11.
Cool.
And that'll just show up like up here. Then we have the Docker file. So that just tells it where to find the Docker file. So it's just pointing at this here. And then we have the customization. So this is customizing our environment. So this is one of the cool things about it, is that we can say what extensions we want installed. So I think this is really neat, because one of the great things about VS Code is that it can work for lots of languages, and it has all these extensions to work for lots of languages, but you don't necessarily need every single extension all the time. So you can say, okay, these are the extensions that you do need for this project. And, when you open it up, the extensions we installed. So I think this is really great if you're working at a company and you want everybody at the company to have a consistent experience and to have all the linting tools and, all have the same helpful extensions built in. You can create a dev container and specify those extensions. Because I remember like my first day, like at Khan Academy or something, when I worked there, the first day is like, set up your environment, download VS Code, download these extensions, blah, 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 right? And you're just downloading so many things.
Totally.
Instead, you could just download one, just start up the dev container.
Totally. This would have been very helpful as a freelance engineer. I was doing project here and project there and project there, and sharing resources with new employees that could kind of come in, help finish up a project sprint, and then leave. This would have been really, really helpful. So it's exciting. Cool.
Yeah, so it's going to load in those extensions. And Christopher asked, does it dynamically unload the extensions? I believe that once you're not using the dev container, it's not going to have those extensions installed anymore. But someone could double check me on that. Then we have a bunch of settings, and the settings are for basically for the extensions. It's a lot of stuff about Python linting and formatting, and they're just standard ones that I use in all my Python ones. And then finally, we have the remote user. So this is connecting inside the container as the VS Code user instead of root. This is a general security best practice that it's just a good thing to not connect as root.
Yep.
And these dev container images all have the VS Code user defined with a particular user ID. So best practice is to use a remote user other than root. And so that's what we do here. All right. And then the question, is it a wrapper around Docker Desktop's dev environment? That's a great question. I noticed that Docker Desktop has dev environments, and I have never clicked it. So I have actually the same question. If anybody does know the relationship between Docker dev environments and dev containers, that would be great. I have not looked into it, and I only noticed this recently in Docker Desktop. We're going to learn so much from this. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Great stream.
So now this is the basic one. All right. So now let's, everything's set here. Should we move on?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're great.
All right. So we're going to close this thing. And I'm just curious, if I close it, is it going to exit? Let's just see if it exits. Still running there, but maybe it'll exit. All right. So let's see. Now we're going to go ahead and see a Flask server.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about Flask for those who are not familiar?
Yeah. So, when you're developing web apps in Python, there's kind of two top frameworks that people often use. There's lots of other frameworks too, but the two top ones are Flask and Django. So Flask is what's often called the lightweight framework, the unopinionated framework, and Django is the very opinionated framework. But it's very opinionated for good reason. Like, it has good opinions, and Django's very good when you're working with a database. Flask, it's you start using Flask, it's got everything you need for a server, but if you do want to have like user authentication, forms, database, you have to decide how you want to bring that in, right? So you need to find like another package if you want to bring in a database for Flask, right? So you have to hodgepodge together various packages when you're making a Flask app. So this is great if you want flexibility. So if you're making an app that's kind of different and you want the flexibility of an unopinionated framework, then Flask is a great option. But if you're making a fairly standard app that's got user authentication and database and all that stuff, then you usually want Django.
I'm not very familiar with Flask. That was a great description. I've done much more with Django and all of its opinions. And I've done Django for a number of years. I love Django, but it is very opinionated framework. So you gave a great rundown. That was good. Awesome.
Yeah, so Khan Academy was built on Flask originally.
Cool.
We've since rewrote it in Go, but it was originally built in Flask, and that did actually work pretty well for it. Let's see, I think Reddit is also built in Flask, I believe. So
news to me. That's cool.
Yeah. All right, so let's take a look at this one. So basically, same base. I use this arg thing here, but so we're using the same very simple Docker file, but now our dev container.json is going to be a bit fancier. So what we do differently here is this forward ports option. So you see forward ports 8000, 8080. This is what tells VS Code that whatever is running on ports 8000 and 8080 inside this container should also be exposed outside of VS Code so that we can go in our browser and go to localhost 8000. So that's really important because this is running inside a container. So normally the things running on these ports would not be available just, in localhost 8080 in our browser. So whatever port you want exposed, you're going to put in that forward ports. Let's see. So question about, can we view logs in dev container inside VS Code? Well, there's the dev container creation logs. It depends, I'm not sure which logs you're talking about, but let me get the dev containers. So you can show the container log. So if you want to see how the container log was built, if that's what you're talking about, you can just use the command palette to show container log. Cool. And this will show the whole process of building. I told them, like, sometimes I just watch this for fun, as like watching paint dry. Super fun. And then in terms of the server logs, we'll see them show up here. So we should have everything we need inside here. Cool. So forward ports, very important when we're running a server. This one, I also use this post create command. This is something you can do in a dev container if there's something that you always need to do when you start up something like installing the requirements. You could stick that in the post create command. So that's what I did here, just so I don't have to remember to run it again. So now, how do we run this server? We're just going to run python app.py. That's where the server is. So we can take a look. This is what a very basic Flask server looks like. It has a couple of routes. It has a 404 handler. And then at the end, it tells the app to run on port 8080. Cool. So let's watch the magic happen. All right. So it says it's running. And we can also see there's this new ports tab. And we even get a little pop-up here that says your application running on port 8080 is available, open in browser. So that's cool. We'll just click that. Ta-da! It's an amazing application.
Hello world. We got it.
Yeah. So let's verify that works. So we can look at the terminal. We can see the logs for the HTTP requests that are coming in to the local server. We could go ahead and change something. So marquee tag is amazing, but it's also deprecated. So we'll change that back to boring old P. And reload. And here we go.
Here we go. Yay.
Unfortunately, Blink, I know this because I'm a freak. Blink is not supported in Chromium-based browsers. I believe it still works in Firefox. So how it was for a long time was that Chromium, like WebKit-based browsers still support Marquee. They still do, as we just saw. And then Firefox still supported Blink. But I don't know if Firefox finally got rid of it or not. I'm happy that the WebKit-based browsers still support Marquee because it cracks me up every time. Sorry, we'll do the Marquee again for those who missed it. This is a tag from way back in the day because I started web development in like 1995 when I was a wee lass.
I remember Marquee from 2009.
It got pretty soon. Okay. Anyway, tangent. So great. So our server is running. So that's how we can run a any sort of server inside CodeSpace. The really important thing is just making sure that you're forwarding those ports. That's the takeaway here. Cool. So now, now what we want to show is CodeSpaces. So,
yes, cool.
I've been doing everything locally in VS Code, but what is really cool is that GitHub CodeSpaces is a way to do all of this in the browser so that you don't need Docker Desktop. You don't need a computer powerful enough for Docker Desktop. You just need a browser and a GitHub account and enough CodeSpace hours. So everybody gets 60 CodeSpace hours free every month. So, use them wisely. We can, I think I'm at 15 hours right now. So let me find the Flash server example. Okay. So in order to open this in CodeSpaces, I'll click on code. And I actually already have a CodeSpace that I started yesterday for this. So I can just open that one and it'll be cached. But if I didn't have that, it would have a big button that said create CodeSpace on main. So you can create a GitHub CodeSpace on any repo and GitHub will try to make a nice dev container for it. But if that repo has a dev container folder, that will customize the CodeSpace experience to be really, really good for that project.
Awesome. Do I see redesigning Spork in that URL?
Yeah, redesign Spork. And then, so the names are just amazing.
Very cool.
We can go ahead and look at all my CodeSpaces here. So CodeSpaces.
Okay.
So we have redesign Spork, ominous palm tree, silver Spork. I've got 2 Sporks right now. Gosh.
Okay.
Illiterate garbanzo, which does concern me quite a bit.
The ominous palm tree is very West Coast. I like it.
Yeah, there's a lot of ominous palm trees getting thrown around in the wind right now.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so here we have, now we've got the server running here. So this is the same repo we were both looking at, just looking at. So let's go ahead. And what you can see is that this is VS Code in the browser. So GitHub CodeSpaces is actually running VS Code in the browser and it's still performant. This is the thing that kind of blows my mind is that I get that VS Code can perform well on the desktop, but the fact that it still performs really well in the browser is just, I don't know.
Yeah, chef's kiss. I love it. Shout out to the team.
Yeah.
Great people working on it too.
So let's go ahead and run this. Okay. And so now it's running. And once again, we get this nice little pop-up. So we're going to open in browser. And this time you can see it's not a localhost URL because this isn't running locally, right? This is running off of GitHub. It's this .github.dev URL. But this is so cool that you can do the whole web development experience in the browser. So, if you are someone that can't run any of this locally, or if you're a teacher with a bunch of students. So I used this for a Flask and Django workshop earlier this week. And most of my students opted to use CodeSpaces because it was just easier to get started than to try and install everything locally, right?
Cool.
So I love it. One thing I want to point out about ports is, okay, so we have, so 8080, right? So the cool thing is this, you can click on visibility. Okay, we can change the port visibility to public. And then that means that actually, like, I could share this URL with you. And you, yeah, I didn't show you this yet. You wouldn't be able to view it. So, you know, it's still like, you shouldn't be hosting websites on this, right? GitHub Codespace is not for hosting websites. But if you were like wanted to quickly check on someone's work while their Codespace was running, right? So it's only going to work while it's running. But
temporary
still,
previews is a very cool feature. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I wanted to show that because that like in a classroom setting, you know, like, oh, you know, just share your website. So you're not going to use this for hosting. If you want to host, we've got Azure App Service and container apps and all that stuff.
I'm saving my question for that later. Okay. But yes, this is good. I'm so excited.
Yeah. So that's really cool. So just, you know, use this ports tab. It's really helpful. Okay, so yeah, Christopher asked, will GitHub spin up the code space if it goes idle? Yeah, so it'll actually, first of all, it'll spin down the code space if I haven't used it, because GitHub does not want to waste resources. So if I've kind of, you know, you've got like 40 tabs open, half of them are code spaces, it'll spin them down after some amount of time if I haven't been using them. Let me see if I can find my code space settings here. Okay, so here we go. Beautiful. Default idle timeout. So right now it's 30 minutes. So we actually recommend, you know, since there is limited budget for code spaces, you probably want to set a very, you know, a short timeout, just so you're not charged for the fact that you left 100 tabs open and forgot about them, right? So I did 30 minutes. I could do even less. There's also retention period. So, you know, CodeSpace, you know, they like to cache the images so that you do have a faster startup time, because it can take, you know, like 5 minutes to start it up. But if you're keeping code spaces around forever that you're not using, well, that's not useful either. So I changed my retention period to also be very short, because I'm trying to maximize the amount of free, I like free. I'm trying to maximize the amount of free, you know, free code spaces I can get. So I recommend going into your code space settings and customizing these as you would like. All right. Cool. Okay, so there we go. So that was Flask. So I think now we can move on to Django plus Postgres.
Yay.
All right.
Exciting.
Let's close
just
down.
trucking along.
This server. Let's open up our quiz app. Okay. And we'll get the little dev container prompt, reopen in container. And I opened this one yesterday, so I think it'll be fairly fast. We can check out the log here. There we go. Yeah, I think it's loading pretty fast today. All right. So here we have, if we look at our dev container now, this is, okay, so just say this is an app where it asks quizzes. So you go, you know, you take a quiz and you get told if you're right or wrong. So it's using a database to store the models. So it's to store the quizzes and questions, and it's using a Postgres database. So I wanted to be able to develop with Postgres database inside the dev container. You can, you know, use Postgres just on your desktop, and I do have my Postgres app running here, pgadmin, but I find it really hard to use. And it always, I don't know, I found it really hard to install. Also has to make sure that I don't like name my databases the same between apps. And I have so many apps that I do name them the same. And then I get these conflicts. So I really wanted to be able to have an isolated developer environment that had the Postgres database just inside there. So that's what this environment does here. So let me show you how that works. Okay. I'm almost tempted to like show, you know, because there's a thing like you can show the end result or you can show how it works first. I kind of want to show the end result too.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start with the end and then maybe go backwards as well. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So This is a Django app, which means the first thing we do is run a migration command. Migrate is what creates all the tables in the database if they're not yet made. So it looks to see what migrations are. It says there's no migrations to apply. That's because I already applied them. But let's go ahead and unmigrate. So Don told me how to do this yesterday. So I'm going to unmigrate. So that's removing the tables. And then I'm going to migrate. All right, so now we should have those tables. In order to verify this, there's this SQLTools extension. This is when I've loaded into the dev container. So SQLTools shows us all the databases that we've told it to connect to. So it's connecting to my app's database. And it means that we can go through and look through here. And when we look at the tables, we see all the tables that just got made. So we see those quizzes table here.
As someone who usually does it through the CLI and P-SQL, this is like great.
Yeah. So you don't have to. You have a full GUI for inspecting your database, right? So show table records, and there's no data right now. We need to make some data.
Wow.
But
okay.
Yeah. Okay. So. All right, so, and then let's actually run the server. So the next thing we're going to do is run the server. And so this will use the same port forwarding that we used in the last one. Okay, it's 404 just because I don't have a front page. I have this page. So /quizzes, say no quizzes are available. All right, so we need to create a quiz. We can do that in the Django admin. So I've already logged into the admin. Otherwise, it would have asked me to log in. So if you've never done Django before, the cool thing about Django is that it automatically creates this admin for you to administer all the models in your app.
Part of the opinions and the very opinionated.
Yeah.
Right. It is the batteries included as well.
Right, exactly. This is like a really cool opinion, I think. So
agreed.
So we're going to make a Python quiz, and let's go ahead. So we made a quiz. Now we're going to add questions to it. All right. So I'm going to say, who invented Python? All right. Who was it, Don?
Guido
Van Rossum.
Yeah.
There we go. So it'll be a free text answer. Let's add another Python quiz. When was Python invented? So I'm going to give some choices here. Anyone knows?
In the chat? Does
someone type in the chat? What is the correct answer?
Okay, I'll guess. Well, what is it? I know from yesterday, but I did guess right yesterday. There's like testament that I did. 1991.
That's right, 1991. Oh, it's so close, Christopher. Thank you for trying. So it was actually 1991. So it's like both. It's actually fairly recent, but also it has been around now for 30 years. So it feels both old and new.
It's longevity.
Yeah. All right. So now we've got some questions. So now we can go back to our app and actually try out the quiz. Python quiz. Who invented Python? I got it. Woo. And when was it invented? 1981. I got it.
I like that green check. It's just validating.
It's always important. I try to add green checks to all my apps. No. So, okay. So now let's go back and inspect this database, right? So now if we click on this, we actually can see, the data. So we see that here's that quiz we made. Let's go ahead and look at the question. So we see 2 questions. We can also run queries. So let me go ahead and run a query. We have to see these new buttons here. So we're going to say select star from quizzes, quiz, where ID equals 1. This is not the most exciting query, I apologize, but it's a SQL query. So we're going to run it. And here we go. We get the results. So this is what's cool about this SQLTools extension is that we both get a UI for browsing and we get the full ability of SQL queries here. And it's got a lot of stuff. You can, export as CSV and JSON. You can, it'll have your query history, which is really cool, right? Because you like forget that really great query you wrote that was 300 lines long. Did exactly what you wanted. So yeah, so this is the SQLTools extension. Okay, so now let's look at this dev container. How did this happen here?
Okay.
All right, because this is a lot more complicated actually. So what you'll see is that there's a new file, Docker compose.yaml. Okay, and we need this file because we're actually going to compose two containers together. We're going to use both a Postgres image and an image for running our server. Okay. So we're composing them together in this file here. So first, let's look at this Docker file that is running our Python app server. So it starts off the same, where it's pulling in one of those VS Code dev containers. It then installs this AZD, which is what I use for deployment. So you don't necessarily need that if you're not deploying to Azure, although I highly recommend it. Then this helps with Postgres. I don't remember why. But then here, it installs the PostgreSQL client. So this is if we want to be able to type PSQL and actually use that client from our terminal. So our setup is a little bit different here. A little bit of customization. But where a lot happens is in Docker compose.yaml. So this, if you haven't seen a compose file before, you specify multiple services under here. So we have the app service and we have the DB service. So if we look at the DB service, this is actually pulling an existing image, which is the official Postgres image. So this is an image that's created by the Postgres people, whoever these nice people are. And it's got Postgres on it. And that will run, that way we'll have a Postgres instance actually running in our dev container. And then it specifies the database name, the username, and the password. Like this is all the administrative details needed to connect to this database. So this is actually really important here because this needs to match what Django uses to connect, right? So if we look at our environment file here, I'm using the same database username and password.
Cool.
So that's our Postgres volume that's going to be running, our Postgres container. And then we have the actual container that's running the app. And this is very, much like what we were doing before, but it does have a few additional configuration to make sure that it can work well with Postgres. So you'll want these additional bits of configuration. And then if we look at devcontainer.json, what you'll see here is that instead of specifying a Docker file, it specifies a Docker compose file. And so, it's going straight to that. It's not, and then this refers to the Docker file, right? So we have this layer in between. And then for forwarding ports, you'll notice I'm now forwarding another port, 5432. This is the port for Postgres. So we're also going to forward that port for Postgres. So that's important. And then the big other thing we've done here is if you look at extensions, I've also brought in the SQLTools extension and the Postgres driver for that SQLTools extension. So that's what enabled me to have that great UI that we were using here.
Cool.
And yeah, those are the really crucial things. Oh, and here, SQLTools needs to know how to connect to the database. So once again, we need to give it the same information that we specified in that Docker compose. So here's the database name, here's the username, here's the password. We also tell it the port, because if you were connecting to a different kind of SQL database, like a MySQL, SQLite, something like that, you might be, using different details here, like a different port.
And I was not joking before that I'm going to use dev containers and this template this weekend when I'm updating a project. And can you remind me where to go find all of these details? You said it was in your GitHub that we were looking at, and this is the Django quizzes template.
Yeah, so if you're looking for any samples that I show, I've got this handy list on my GitHub. So today we looked at the 311 playground, then we looked at simple Flash server example, and then we looked at Django quiz app.
Awesome.
So you could get inspiration from any of the ones, like if you're doing something with Postgres, any of these ones that use Postgres, you could get inspiration from. So I've got different combinations here. Like if you want Flask and Postgres, Django and Postgres, just find the one that's most similar to what you're doing and use that. So we had a question related to deploying. After deploying the application, can anyone access the .mdb connection variables? So I do not deploy the .m file when I deploy the application. This is going to depend on how you deploy an application, because here we're not deploying, we're testing locally. But when you'll actually notice this is grayed out because this is my git ignore knows to ignore this file. You should not be checking your secrets into GitHub, right? So I have this .m.sample, and this just has the stuff for localhost, so that's fine. But .m is ignored. But also when I do deploy, I use a very different way of specifying the environment variables. I specify it in the application settings, or I even put it in an Azure Key Vault, and I reference them from the Azure Key Vault. So where you store your environment variables does depend on how you're deploying, where you're deploying to. Let me show. So here, so I specify, this is how I deploy. I deploy using a bicep file. This is deployed as your app service. And it passes in this information here. And the password actually gets generated randomly here. So this is one way of specifying it. But yeah, do be very careful. Never check your secrets into GitHub, and try to secure your secrets when you deploy as well. So best practice is actually to put them inside a key vault. And I have another sample that does that.
So this may be a little bit like a step and a half behind what you were just answering, but can I deploy my dev containers? I'm imagining it's Docker lift and shift. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, so good question. So you look at this and think like, oh, can I just deploy to a Docker-based environment using this Docker compose.yaml? But the thing to keep in mind about dev containers is they're designed to be your development environment. And your development environment is not necessarily the same as your production environment, because like in our development environment, we've got the PostgreSQL client and we've got this AZD thing. We don't need that in production. This is all stuff we're using, because we're developing. So there is going to, this would look very similar to if you were deploying to production, but your dev environment is not the same thing as your production environment. So I would expect that a Docker Compose that you were actually deploying would look slightly different.
Great.
Let's see. Can I use these settings in CodeSpace? I'm not sure which settings that question is talking about. If you could clarify that. Yeah, good things around secrets here. Another thing I want to say, right? Well, so with deploying, so I have all of the samples that I have actually set them up for easy deploying, and I do that using the Azure Dev CLI. So that's why I have this, this little line here that installs AZD. And that means on any sample I'm on, I can type AZD up, and it'll ask me to log in, right? So I'll have to log in, especially if I'm on Codespaces. That's something that just got introduced in the latest. Wait, let me do it in the one I was just using. Sorry, I didn't realize. So here's the thing is that I got confused. I thought I was in the browser just now. But I'm local. Okay, now everything makes sense. There was one, let me open one that I was just deploying right before this stream. I basically spend just deploying all the time. So this is the one that I just deployed, and it looked like I just rewrote the whole deployment infrastructure for it. But it looks like it did actually work on my latest deploy. So I'll try it out. But generally the idea is that I can type AZD up, and it will deploy this to Azure. That doesn't really have to do much with dev containers, but it's a thing I like to add to all my samples because I like it to be easy to develop and easy to deploy. And I just want like one click or one command for everything, right?
Oh my gosh, me too. I'm just like tingling with excitement.
Let's
This
see
is
how we do
great.
with this. So AZD up, and I was deploying earlier, so it's going to use these environment details. So this is where it's going to deploy to. This is the location, and your doggy's home.
Yes.
And this is all using bicep files. So bicep is like Terraform, which is infrastructure as code. So it's a declarative language for declaring what you want to deploy things to. So I write all these bicep files that say, okay, I'm going to make a storage account. I'm going to make an app service plan. I'm going to make a function app. I'm going to make an API gateway, all this stuff. And then I use the Azure Dev CLI, and it looks through all the bicep files, makes sure that it's okay, checks to see which resources exist already, and makes the ones that don't exist, and it'll go through each of them. So, we can watch that and see if it succeeds again for the second time. It'd be cool. More questions? Oh, I think we just lost Don, probably to the doggy. Hi, Don.
I just wanted to tell my dog to be quiet off screen. Great. This is great. And we can see it working. Done, done, done. That's always a really nice confirmation.
Yeah. So here you can see it's deploying here. Okay, there's a lot of questions about light mode, and I like light mode. I actually have filed multiple issues in various repos that don't support light mode. So actually the latest version of AZD now has slightly better colors because of the issue I filed, because it literally, like, this wasn't readable before in light mode. So I like light mode. You might like dark mode. That's cool. Tomato. We can still get along. So, I think it's important to support both, because for accessibility reasons, some people might really like light mode. Some people might really like dark mode. Like, some people always are working at night. And for, that reason, they like dark mode. I like light mode because, I don't know, it just makes me happy to have things be bright. And I also just generally like high contrast, because a lot of times I am working in a low contrast situation, because a lot of times my baby is napping on me, because I have a 7-month-old baby. So a lot of my deploys are while a baby is napping on me. And so I need to be able to see what's going on. So I like when I can actually see what's on my screen. So I like high contrast, and I like light mode. I consider checking. Okay. And I have LASIK, so my eyes are perfect. I just like light mode.
I don't think there's any deficiency with light mode. I like dark mode, so I'm not like raring for it, but like, yeah, there's a good group of you. You are not alone.
I know. It's just, there's so many things to fight about in the world that I don't think we should fight about light mode. We should just try to support both. Everyone should try to support both, because they're all valid. And also please support high contrast as well, because that's very important for accessibility.
I agree.
Okay, so we have a question. Not all even. So this is a great question. Is there a way to override the dev container on a per developer basis? Like if someone wants to add in something specific for their use case? That's a good question, because you might want to bring in different extensions. So there's probably stuff that you could put in your VS Code folder, because, in VS Code, you can have extensions.json. So if you wanted to have like different extensions, you could probably stick those there. So I'm thinking that I don't know of a way of overriding the dev container on a developer specific thing. But I think there's probably a way you could set it up where each developer could have their own extensions.json and settings.json and launch.json that aren't checked into Git. Because a lot of times launch.json is actually something that is particular to a particular developer and isn't checked into Git. So that's probably what I'd suggest. But if anybody has any other ideas, please post those in the chat. Okay, can I use a bicep file to declare this file for saving the IPFS, IP key, API key, and app key? Yeah, so this, with bicep and with the AZD CLI, you can actually do quite a lot with with key saving. So in another sample, I have it actually first generates the password. And then if it doesn't exist yet in Key Vault, it saves it in Key Vault. And then the subsequent time, it pulls it out from Key Vault. I think that was, let's see, was that actually this one? Let's see how this one's done. Main.bicep, main.pillars. No, let's check it on the quiz app. Yeah, I think this one is the one that's set up so that if it's in a Key Vault already, it's going to get it from the Key Vault. Otherwise, it'll put it in the Key Vault. So it's possible to do that using the Azure Dev CLI and Bicep. So yeah, just toot at me or email me or whatever, and
Yeah.
I can.
Quick plug. How can people toot or tweet or?
Yeah, I mean,
you?
for now, I'm checking both of them. But I'm generally Pamela Fox everywhere. So on for Mastodon, I'm Pamela Fox at fosstodon.org, and then for Twitter, I am Pamela Fox. So if there's a particular sample you're looking for, a link, a tutorial, whatever, just tweet or toot, and I should see it somewhere.
Another question.
Yes.
Oh,
okay.
yep,
Right.
right.
And this did deploy, by the way, which is really cool. So for those of you who do know Fast API, this is deploying Fast API with an API management in front in order to have a level of like rate limiting and security and stuff like that. So this did deploy all of those things, which is really cool. There we go. And see, we can use my amazing name generating API because, of course, since I make babies, I like to make apps to generate names for them. Because what if I have so many that I run out of names? All right. Question. Can we use dev containers on a remote machine and SSH? So as I know it, dev containers, let's go ahead and go to the dev containers website. Okay, so here's the GitHub for dev containers, github.com/dev containers. And then there's also containers.dev. So dev containers is an open specification. And the idea is for, various tools to be able to support it. So we can look at supporting tools. So what you'll see is that, as we see, Viz Code supports it. Looks like Visual Studio as well. And you can see some other supports here. I haven't used Caches or Jetpack. It's possible that those would let you do like an SSH situation. GitHub Codespaces. So it's not, dev containers aren't supported a ton of places right now besides Viz Code and Codespaces, but there is growing support for them. So it may be that's already possible to SSH into somewhere and use a dev container. And if not, maybe it will be eventually. Can you like SSH into a Viz? Well, how could you I'm thinking about this. Because part of dev container is that you have this the IDE too. So I'm trying to imagine. Yeah. You're just trying to SSH into a Docker container at that point, right? Because a dev container is adding on all this, editor stuff. So if you're SSHing, then you just really want the Docker container part. So at that point, I would just look into running a Docker container, like maybe on Azure container instances and SSHing into that. I think that would probably make sense.
Okay, great answer.
So somebody is on an ARM Mac. I'm also on an M1. I have so many issues being on an M1, let me tell you. We're really taking one for the team. So using remote containers slows down my entire editor, presumably due to container speed. Any suggestions? So I haven't had the experience of feeling like my editor is slowing down. I wonder, one thing you can play with, my general experience with M1 is that, like things happen that are weird. And when, it's something, so very often I encourage you to file issues if it makes sense to file an issue in some repository, whether it's a Viz Code repository or dev containers or something, or Docker. The other thing, sometimes it helps to look at your Docker configuration. So I've definitely fixed various things by changing the settings, especially the extensions one. And no, experimental features. So I think I had to turn off this feature here because of a particular M1 issue. So I'm not a Docker expert. So there might be other places that you can ask this, but that's generally what I found is that, filing issues where it makes sense. And then also playing with the Docker settings sometimes can help with those sort of things. So hopefully we can figure out something that helps you. Cool.
Awesome. This was an excellent stream. This was great. And I think we got through most all of the stuff that we were looking for. So did you have anything else you wanted to add today, Pamela?
I'm sure like in an hour from now, I'll be like, oh, we did it.
Write it down for the next stream. And actually, that's an excellent plug. So we are every second Friday of the month. Our next stream will be on February 10th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And then there's also some sneaky opportunities for some bonus streams on the fourth Friday every once in a while when we get an excellent guest and we want to get on and share some new Python at Microsoft things with you. So it's been really an excellent first stream. We've had a lot of interaction, a lot of really great questions, and truly like the special and lucky guest of Pamela Fox. And I'll show the announcements just one more time at the end of the call. And if you want more information on some of these announcements, you can definitely check out the show notes at ak.ms/python-pulse-001 first episode -Pamela-Fox. All right. This has been a great stream, y'all. It was
Thank you, everyone. Great
everyone.
questions. Bye.
Bye.